what we would do is we would just put proposal topics in front of them and see what they thought. I said, so how did that go? Didn't go too well. Why not? Well, everything we showed them they liked. Well, of course, when you focus group topics, that's what's going to happen. It's just, that's the same reason Microsoft products are hard to use. Featureitis. And you can't publish everything that comes up. Everything sounds good in principle, but in practice it's not really going to be the case. So what I found really helpful was, again, I'm starting from scratch. That's a good thing. I can avoid making some of those types of mistakes, but it's almost too much flexibility. There's a lot of rope, enough to hang yourself with. So what I found really useful was starting out with some constraints, some boundaries, in the form, in this case, of a metaphor. And the metaphor is a woven metaphor, in effect, where the books that we're trying to do fit into verticals and horizontals that weave together pretty nicely. So the horizontals, the check ones are the ones we've already signed and are underway. So we have 5 books in process. And those horizontals are basically user experience design methods, things that you could use in almost any context. So this book on mental modeling, or prototyping, or card sorting, how to do this stuff in a very practical way, and in a short format, 200 pages, thereabouts. And we have a few other ideas for topics that we're working through. We can envision actually getting up to about 20 to 30 titles in the horizontal area. And at the same time, we're working on developing a vertical series, which is user experience design in specific contexts, like industry types. So if you're a UX practitioner trying to learn about and work within financial services industry or the healthcare industry, what do you need to know? Now, the important thing about metaphors is that not only will they break, but you should try to break them at the right times. And one of the things we found was there were some other really great titles that came to us or that we sought out and decided to sign. And one of them is something that does not fit at all. Maybe it's a diagonal, but you don't do that in meetings, so it really does break the metaphor. So this book, Web Form Design, Best Practices in Web Form Design, sounds pretty boring, maybe, but you wouldn't believe how many people want this book, because it's such a critical, every website pretty much exists with this critical transactional endpoint that if it doesn't convert, what's the point? So I'm very happy to break the metaphor there. It's gotten us pretty far, and now we're starting to fit things, or try to come up with things that don't really fit it. But nonetheless, having this type of model from the very start really has been helpful in the face of just dozens of proposals that come my way, and trying to select through them, make sense out of them. Okay. I'm going to show you something else that's been really helpful with the work in terms of identifying proposals, and not actually more importantly topics that merit proposals. So we're creating a service that you might actually find useful, and I hope that you'll actually consider participating in it. It's called User Experience Zeitgeist. And let me show you how it works. I got a bunch of windows loaded here. We're not actually going to do this live. I don't think the connectivity is working. But basically, we are talking to a number of people in the field like yourselves. We're just out of alpha, so we haven't reached you yet. But we're basically asking individuals like, here's Peter Morville, a few questions. If you could have only one user experience book on your shelf, what would it be? So this is the book that you would take with you on a desert island. What about the book that deserves more attention? This is the book that people really should know about but don't. This is not the one that wins the popularity contest but deserves more attention. And finally, what are topics for books that you would like to see written? Now, we get a kind of interesting bunch of data when we start asking people. We've asked about 70 or 80 people these questions now. And if you think in terms of databases, what you can actually do with this data is create pages, in effect, for each person who responds, which is what I'm showing you right now, each book that they nominate, as well as each topic that they nominate. And when you have those pages, in a Web 2.0 world, they serve as nice frameworks for mashups. And in this case, we're mashing up or bringing in content that is related to in this case, this person in the user experience world. So what we're doing here is bringing in information, in this case from Amazon, about what Peter has written, recent blog postings via his RSS feed, how his interests in terms of how he tags information in Delicious, other people mentioning him in books from Google Book Search, him being mentioned in other blogs from their Google Blog Search, and so forth, mentions in podcasts, mentions in user experience publications that we're doing through via a roll-up of user experience publications. We also, I'm not sure it's going to work because we're not live here, but we actually track all these metrics, and we have little kind of comparisons of how, for example, Peter is doing in terms of books authored versus the leader. He looks like he is the leader, and how he's doing overall over time. So let's see if this works. So we can actually do some little visual tracking, and there's a lot of kinks in this. I don't know how useful this part is yet, but what's more important are these pages in terms of the information they're assembling that's relevant to user experience. So again, we have a page for Peter, in this case, a page for every book he's nominated, and a page for every topic he's nominated that look very similar, where we're mashing in, again, a set of user experience related resources. So when you put those together, you get some interesting indices. So the index of people, like Peter, can be sorted by all those various criteria, such as how many books he's authored, or how frequently he's mentioned in the blogosphere. We have a similar index for books. So what we're showing here are essentially the product of a number of people's nominations. Again, we can sort them by all those different criteria we're mashing in, like it's Amazon sales rank, how many library thing users own it in their collections, and how many blogs have mentioned it, and so forth. And actually with books, what we're doing is then coming up with an overall score based on all those criteria. So a very simple algorithm that we're very transparent about that weights the various criteria and gives us an overall ranking, which is our default ranking here. And we could actually look at this list of books by the subsets of the ones that people would take along on a desert island versus the subset of ones that deserve more attention, the dark horses, if you will. So when we open this up a bit more in the next month or so, we think this list is going to be even better, and it'll be a lot richer. And I also think that this is going to be a pretty beneficial community service to the user experience profession, because in effect, a lot of people doing a small amount of work, answering 3 questions, and the product in effect is the canon of user experience books. We're also, from my perspective, going to find this really valuable. This is essentially the index of the topics that people want books written on. There's a couple little problems, like you can tell that 2 and 3 are really the same thing. Design and business, and business and design. So we need to do a little bit better job of normalizing the topics that people mention. But nonetheless, I can tell you a little bit about what people say they want. And this is free, so you can look at this, and publishers, my competitors as well, can look at it, and that's good, because ultimately we're going to create better and more appropriate books for everyone this way. So that's, this is a service that I've been working on for like about 1.5 years. I've been spending way too much money on it. It's very hard to get this thing off the ground. And I'm actually finding that existing services sometimes give me maybe as much or more value for a lot less money. So for example, I asked on LinkedIn recently what people thought of a certain topic and who should write it. And I got incredible response for free, much less than I'm spending on this. I think the jury's out on this. It's still very early to tell if this is going to be a really valuable service or not, but I'm hopeful. And if you're interested in participating in it, just let me know, send me an email, and I'll send you an invitation when we're ready to move to the next phase. Okay. So one of the other things that's been really helpful in terms of figuring out what books is having good people to work with you. This is my editorial board. It's one of my 2 boards, and you're probably familiar with a number of these folks. And they're actually helping me quite a bit with acquisitions. They're actually the ones who often point people to me that I should talk to, as well as evaluate the proposals that we're looking at. And we're finding, I find, and maybe you do too, and if you don't, I encourage you to think this way, that sometimes all you got to do is ask. This is a stellar group, and all I did was ask them if they would be willing, and they say yes. People are often more willing to help you than you ever imagined, but you have to find out, and we do it just by asking. So the obvious lessons here. I'm using, in this case, a metaphor to create some boundaries for myself, and then I'm violating those boundaries, and that's okay. Web 2.0 stuff, like the user experience zeitgeist service, is really expensive. Don't be deceived if you try to do it yourself, but if you do it, one of the big mistakes that I've made is it's taken too long, and I probably could have launched it much earlier, and it might have had a better impact. I'm not sure if I'm dealing with a finite window. I don't really know, but I have my suspicions. And finally, the best authors, the best topics, and the best help will come to you. It won't come to you, but it will be easily pursued if you ask. Okay. One more thing. The last one is book content. So, what books should we publish? Or how do we ensure that our books are good? Well, one of the things I'm finding really useful is if you see books as dialogues. And really, this is another mistake I think that many publishers, because they've been at it so long, are making. The book traditionally has been a monologue. In the age of interactivity that we're in right now, there's no reason it has to be. Books actually can be much more in the form of a dialogue. So what we're finding really useful is to let that sort of dialogic approach permeate every aspect of book development. And it starts when I start talking with a potential author. And we have a proposal template on our site, like any other publisher, but I say, don't even bother with that. Send me an idea. Get the idea down. Elevator pitch, brief outline. And often that's like the biggest barrier for them. They just can't get that down. And it takes a lot of encouragement sometimes. They're a little uncomfortable. It seems unfinished. They don't want to share it. But I try to impose upon them the idea that, you know, it's dialogue. We're going to iterate. We're going to talk it through, back and forth. And in effect, what we have is an agile process, or I spend some time fairly intensely working with potential authors to get them to the point where that idea is fleshed out enough that it's a solid proposal. And then we kind of move into this very traditional mode. It's almost the opposite of agile, where I put a proposal in front of that editorial board that we just saw, and I pay them to review as experts every proposal. And they've turned down probably half the ones I put in front of them, which is pretty painful for me. But it becomes a dialogue then with a larger group. And when we sign an author, it goes through. The next day, they have a movable type blog that's been customized for books. And they start engaging in an even broader dialogue with people who will hopefully be their readers, but maybe initially other helpers. And I can't tell you how useful this dialogic approach is. I'm eating my own dog food in the sense that I'm actually co-authoring one of the books I'll be publishing next year. And we put up an initial chapter, and we solicited feedback. We got a lot of really good input, including from someone who was just incredibly critical. And, you know, like any product, it's your thing, it's your baby. And our first reactions to that were, what's he know? You know, actually it was a lot stronger than that, but I won't use the words in this company. And you know, I went to bed that night. The next morning I woke up, and the first thing I thought of was, as much as I hate to say it, this guy was right. So we reiterated, we redid the content along the lines he suggested. Now, he was going to have that comment for us, before the book was published or after the book was published. Obviously, these afford us opportunities to incorporate improvements before the product is encapsulated in a way that's very hard to back away from. In other words, when it's printed. We then broaden that dialogue as much as possible so people can visit the site and in a passive way they can get the content through RSS. In a more active way, because you're putting up content on sites, it's not just the stuff that's book draft material, but the stuff that doesn't belong in print. Templates and scripts and images and so forth that may not make sense in print. you're creating a very rich search engine optimized environment, so it's going to be very likely to be searchable and found through searching. And in fact, doing that, we're finding that we're not going to have to invest in Google AdWords at all for our books. So they're already coming up 1, 2, 3 Google results. And they're not even published yet. But we're also then finding that that affords sort of the next step, which is for people to comment and have input. And then the next step is we're actually going out and soliciting their input in things like surveys. Now we're finding that to be fantastically helpful. So let me give you an example. With a book that I'm working on, created a very brief survey and sent it to about 50 people that I know are interested in the topic. Got fantastic response, probably 70% response rate, and fantastic results. The last question was, who else do you think might want to take this survey? And then we expanded through degrees of separation our network around this specific book. And what we're finding is when we start with 50, we get up to 200 or so. And I'm just giving you a little snippet of how that network, that social network around a particular book topic maps out. So-and-so referred us to so-and-so, and so-and-so referred us to so-and-so. Now what's really nice about that is then that network map is a tool for us to grow the dialogue further. So if we see that one person is a real hub in a network, we approach them. We may not know who they are, but we should know who they are. They may be someone who can help us with book development. They may have some good ideas for case material. They may have good ideas for, in terms of tech reviewing books, and so forth. And then often, when you ask, they become promoters. They're engaged, and they become stakeholders. And so when the book comes out, they'll notice, because they've had something to do with it, and they may tell other people. And so we're actually building in many opportunities to grow networks through capturing this type of information all through our processes. And we're building essentially, if you look at all the data like this that we're capturing, in aggregate, we're building an incredible social network map of the user experience field. Now, that sort of implies that we're building infrastructure, and we are. And when you start from scratch in the era of the internet, you make a mistake if you don't think of yourself as an infrastructuralist. So one of the things we're finding really beneficial is taking advantage of the things that, you know, a lot of the students here probably take for granted, but a lot of other people don't. So when you're creating infrastructure to support dialogue, especially, tools like Basecamp are fantastic for helping authors and editors who are often quite distributed interact with each other, and then we can bring in other people, indexers and illustrators and so forth, into the process in a much more effective way. On the public side, as I said, we're using movable type for our way to communicate and have a dialogue with potential readers and others. And obviously RSS comes along with that. One of the other things we're going to be doing that we think is going to be pretty promising as a tool for engagement is uploading all diagrams to Flickr and making them available so that people can put them in their own presentations, as well as comment on them. So we'll see how that goes. And of course, then there's a whole world of analytics, and specifically we're using FeedBurner and Google Analytics, and trying to close the loop with authors. I mean, analytics close a loop. You design or create something, and then you want to see how it's doing. Well, if we can use these tools to share information, not only amongst ourselves inside the company, but with our authors, so they have a better understanding of how well their content is doing, we think that's really effective. But the problem is, infrastructure is great, but you still need people, especially editors, to run your projects. And despite everything I'm talking about and how good I might sound, it's still incredibly hard to produce a book. So the lessons here: trust yourself. You know, you guys all have this incredible design knowledge coursing through our bloodstream. And if you start from scratch, especially, and trust yourself, you may not have all the kind of opportunities to do the testing and evaluation by the book, as much as you feel like you want to and feel guilty when you don't. But you're still going to probably do pretty well, especially if you build in iterative opportunities as much as possible. And those iterative opportunities, hopefully, are ones that engage your audience as much as possible as well. That audience is part of a network. Think of it as a network where they're not just customers, but peers that can have other types of relationships with you. So a reader might at some point be a tech reviewer. It might be someone who tells you who should have a quote on your back jacket cover because they know their little community better than you do, and so on. People have different roles. As long as they're in your network, you treat them as peers in the network, you'll be able to take advantage of those roles and the expertise in your network if you build it consciously. There's no excuse to ignore infrastructure. It's so easy to do now, thanks to all these wonderful services. But again, making books, like any other product, is still and always will be really incredibly hard and relies on the designers and the creators and the other creative people with all their various skills. So a few lessons in summary. I'm a big fat hypocrite, and I have to live with that. And any of you are probably going to find yourselves feeling really hypocritical if you're building products of your own, whether it's books or something else. It's really hard not to be. It's hard because you're too close. You're like the client. It's very hard, and you get the whole cobbler's children having no shoes effect going on. But it shouldn't stop you, because you're still going to get further than, especially if you have competitors who aren't adopting this type of thinking, who aren't applying design research and evaluation methods. One of the other things we're finding is in this field, research equals marketing. When you ask people to help you, when you ask their opinion and ask them for information, for testing, participation, whatever, they're usually very happy and they'll respect you for it, because that's what the field is about, and they'll tell other people. So it's a good form of marketing, good form of visibility. Being open about things like that, being transparent, is also clearly an obvious thing that we should be doing, and yet it doesn't happen very often. Why is that? Asking for help is great, and then finally, eat your own dog food. You know, what else can we do? How else can we create products without essentially trying them out ourselves, trying out the things that we preach while creating these products? So that's pretty much it.